Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this afternoon's session, Disruptive Technology, the Future of the Workforce, moderated by the Chief Economic Correspondent for Politico, Ben White, and co-chaired by partner at McKinsey Global Institute, Susan Lund, and the Executive Director of SHIFT, the Commission on Work, Workers, and Technology at New America, Kristen Sharp.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Sorry we're starting a little bit late here. I guess there was a senator in here before us, and occasionally they've been known to speak at length and utilize the filibuster. Not that I have any experience with that as a political reporter. Anyway, I'm Ben White, Chief Economic Correspondent for Politico. Highly recommend you sign up for Morning Money if you don't already read it. That's a shameless plug, which is my only charge for doing this panel. It's an incredibly daunting and large array of very smart people we have here, so we're going to try to get some interesting, smart thoughts from everybody on the future of the workforce and the disruption that is going on in so many different industries and the challenge that faces lawmakers, policymakers, people in a variety of industries. There's a ton to talk about, but I want to turn it over to Susan Lund, who is our chairperson, who can introduce us to what we're going to talk about.
Thank you all for joining us today. I've been asked to just set the stage for what this session is about. It's about technology, automation, AI, and the future of the workforce. And given that we've got a little bit of a late start, I will keep my remarks very short, given that I'm not a senator, I'm an economist. So, look, today we're living in an era where there is a lot of concern about the impact of automation and artificial intelligence on the future of the workforce. We've been here before. You can go back to the Luddites in Nottingham, England in 1810 that smashed the weaving looms because of the concern that you were going to put weavers out of business. In more recent times, you can go back 100 years, almost 90, to 1930 and read an essay by John Maynard Keynes called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. And when you read that essay, which I encourage you all to go look up online, it reads like something that could have come out of the Wall Street Journal or Politico just this morning. And his concern was about what he called technological unemployment. So we've been here before. At the McKinsey Global Institute, we're doing new research looking at the impact of automation on work in countries around the world, including advanced economies as well as emerging economies. And we're trying to identify new sources of labor demand to say, what are the occupations and jobs that could grow in the future in the next 15 years? Which ones are going to decline? And what are the skill requirements of workers in the new growing jobs versus the ones that are disappearing? And overall, I think in the scheme of all the discussion, I would say we will have a pretty optimistic and positive report. As an economist, I can point to many episodes throughout history that have had massive technological disruptions. Electricity, the creation of the internal combustion engine. Slipped there. And it was disruptive. We had the rise of computers and the internet. And when we look at what happened, we do see that jobs were destroyed, that some people were replaced by machines, but that over time, the new technologies ended up creating many, many more jobs than were destroyed. So in the case of the personal computer, we can identify, net job creation in the United States alone of over 15 million jobs, and the vast majority of those are not in the technology industry itself. It's throughout the economy, in the users, and industries enabled by computers. When we look forward, we see that between now and 2030, globally, somewhere in the range of 15 to 20% of work could be automated. This ranges by country, but that's the middle of the road estimate. So at a high end, you could see much larger share of work automated. And that does raise questions about what will people do. In our work, we've looked at different drivers of future labor demand, including rising incomes, building infrastructure, and other factors like the green economy. And we can identify plenty of job growth to offset automation, by and large, in most, but not all scenarios. But the middle of the road scenarios indicate there could be plenty of work to do. Now, the big problem, though, will be getting people from the jobs disrupted into those growing. When we look at the United States, we can look back at the last 15 and 17 years and look at what's happened in the manufacturing sector, where the country has lost on net about 5 million jobs. And very little was done to help the individuals who were put out of work. And over time, we found that, in fact, a lot of people were left behind, although it was a time of growing incomes and prosperity across the country, individuals were left behind. So I think that our work is going to illustrate the magnitude of this challenge to get individuals the skills that they need and help them identify new work paths and career paths that they can successfully get on. And if we can make that transition, then we are indeed looking at a very bright future of higher productivity growth, machines doing a lot of the things we don't like to do, but having everybody be included in that prosperity.
Thank you very much for that sharp summation. Kristen Sharp is Executive Director of SHIFT, the Commission on Work, Workers, and Technology at the New America Foundation, right? Or is it Foundation? Just New America. Okay, very good. The one thing I really worry about in automation, and I hope we can get to this, is that there are no automated moderators in the future, and that this role, because I do a lot of moderating, so if you could reassure me on that. Kristen, do you want to give us a little bit of a introduction?
Sure. So moderators aren't going away. We'll always need people to do this kind of thing, lead discussions, brainstorm. Like Susan, I run a program that looks at the way that automation and artificial intelligence and emerging technologies are changing the future of work for people. And we looked specifically over the course of the last year or so, New America in partnership with Bloomberg, at all of the various factors that are changing what work looks like 20 years from now. So we brought together a group of CEOs in every industry, in policymaking, in the civic entrepreneurship and cultural worlds, and in all forms of tech and business backgrounds to think about what does work look like 20 years from now. And we analyzed on 2 dimensions what the options were in sort of a scenario planning facilitated brainstorming exercise. And the dimensions that we looked at were, will there be more or less work as a result of emerging technologies? And will that work be structured the way it is now, with a job title and a set responsibility and rate of pay and things like that? Or will people move to a situation in which everybody works on a more on-demand, project-based world? And in total, with 125 brainstorming participant CEOs, people, workers in every sector, we came up with 43 different scenarios, which boiled down to 4 categories in everything from sort of an advanced farmer's market-like society where human-based interactions and things that were made by people had a premium, to an augmented, microchipped, everybody's got something in their brain society. But the interesting thing wasn't thinking about what the 4 futures looked like, or 43 futures, or any amount of futures looked like. The interesting things were what kinds of ideas surfaced over and over again when people thought about work and what it means to people. And those 3 things were the concept of the psychology and identity of work. If our jobs change to the point where you don't call yourself a trucker or a teacher or a computer analyst anymore, what are the emerging things, and what does that do for people if we're working on a more project-based, more sort of multi-dimensional and fluid basis of work? 2, most of the types of work that are emerging right now are self-motivated in some way. They're things where you have to identify a new way of working, set yourself up as an entrepreneur, create an idea that nobody's come up with yet, and market yourself to do it. And those are the things that are out there as potential emerging jobs. And what does that mean for people when we're used to having a specific employer that tells you what to do? And then finally, in looking at the fact that 15 to 30% of jobs that are emerging in our economy are self-directed in some way, we surveyed people about what they want in work. And the by far, the number one thing that people want in a job is stability. It's the ability to forward plan what their income will be, what their community of people that they work with will be, what their day-to-day job will look like, and how much they control it and how much agency they have in it. And so the juxtaposition between those things, that most jobs are self-directed and what most people want is stability, is an interesting question, I think, for all of us and for the future of work.
Thank you very much for those intros. Generally speaking, at these kind of panels where there are this many people, I'm not the biggest fan of just going one by one and each person giving a little soliloquy on their views on the topic. But I thought what we might do is at least start that way, and we'll start with Dan Bryant from Walmart to tell us just in maybe a minute who you are, what you do, and then the question I would pose to you is, what do you think is the biggest risk to the workforce over the next decade, 2 decades, from automation, from robotics, and what is the biggest opportunity? What scares you and what excites you about the future of the workforce as we see all of these technologies? But what I would encourage everyone to do is, as we start going around the room, if you hear something that you disagree with, agree with, like to augment, please feel free to just give a finger up or hand up, and I'll recognize you, and we can sort of disrupt the usual pattern of just going around the room. But I thought it would be a good way to start that way, and then if there's a jumping off point for a good discussion, we can just get right into it. But we'll start with Dan on those topics. Tell us just a little bit about your role in this subject area, and then what you're hopeful about, what you're worried about, and then anybody, if you want to jump in, please do, and we'll just see where it goes from there.
Thank you. The most important thing I can do is to introduce Julie Gerke from the Walmart Foundation, who is here today. Make sure you meet Julie afterwards, doing superb work focused on future of work issues. The great risk is that we will not get the people implications, the people dimensions of this future of AI and technology right. The great opportunity is that we end up figuring out training, constant training, on a scale that really hasn't been envisioned before, that leaves us with tech-enabled employees. We have made an historic investment in the last 2.5 years to equip and train our workforce. It's focused on those coming into the company and those who are moving through leadership responsibilities in the company. What we are seeing already is that how we are doing that training is having to evolve already. The big trainee, as we are training, is Walmart. We are learning what it needs to look like to be this dynamic trainer of our workforce. We have a second conviction, and that is that we cannot get where we need to be as this tech-enabled workforce if we aren't serious about lifting the retail sector. The retail sector is where so many people make their entry into the workforce. We have to improve the retail sector, both in terms of allowing frontline people to move forward and then really allowing associates to become more sophisticated in the way they use technology throughout their work.
Thank you for that. And we'll go to Mary, if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then what is scary to you about this and exciting to you about this.
My name is Mary Snap, and I lead Microsoft Philanthropies. I am a leader of a department that is within the corporation. We are not a separate foundation, and we do that because we think it's important for us to be able to use our voice, to be able to work with our employees and our employee engagement with this work, and to be able to talk about our products and technology in a way that helps drive everyone forward. So as we think about Microsoft in general, this week we have Satya Nadella's book out, Hit Refresh. And this isn't a pitch for that, but what I'm saying is that we are at an age of innovation, and I really think Microsoft, among other tech companies, is one of the leaders in terms of innovation, and that means more cloud, more artificial intelligence. And we do know that when innovation comes, there is a risk that people are left behind. And in the last 20 or 30 years, if you look at what's happened, one might argue that in the age of the PC, people didn't come along more closely or, in similar as they had in some of the other previous industrial revolutions. And we think that we have an obligation to ensure that the gap doesn't get bigger and that, in fact, the gap gets narrower. So for us, that means a lot of talk about digital skills and digital literacy, all the way along the stack, from turning on a computer to our volunteers who teach computer science in high schools. And it really means thinking about education in a different way. It means that we need to talk about educational reform, that college is great, and it is important to also have certificates and what we call stackable skills for people with that high school degree who are entering a job in the retail sector, who will need to learn technical and digital skills, on average, relearning them every 5 to 7 years in their lifetimes. And so it's important for us to ensure that we have these kinds of standardized mechanisms to work with business, industry, education, so that people get the skills that they need. The baseline skills, the communication, computational thinking, critical thinking, collaboration, those are table stakes for all that is to come, but the skills will change, and we need to help people change along with it.
Thank you for that. It's always nice to have the Washington contingent here. We've got Congressman French Hill, who is co-chair of the Skilled Workforce Caucus, obviously is a congressman from Indiana, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought I had it right.
You're from the great state of Arkansas.
Arkansas.
I'm trying to make sure Walmart
there we go. Anyway, co-chair of the Skilled Workforce Caucus. What do you think are some of the ways that the public sector can support workforce training and development, and what role can partnerships play with the private sector in this area?
Well, thanks, Ben, and I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this distinguished group at Concordia on a topic that is a hot topic. It's a hot topic in every boardroom. It's a hot topic with every governor in all of our 50 states from two components. One is the skills gap that we've talked about for people in the workforce today, making a midlife career change because of the reduction of manufacturing jobs in recent years. How do you do that? The population of people coming out of incarceration and how they shift back to society and re-enter the workforce as a part of that issue. And then finally, and I think perhaps most importantly, is our K through 12 education system. Fortunately, I'm old enough here just to date myself, making the first board presentation using VisiCalc at a public company in Dallas in the old days, or thinking when I worked on the White House staff, Laura, that a fax machine was high tech. So with that said, K through 12 education is stuck in sort of an analog world. I mean, it really is, no matter how much innovation we've poured into it with STEM education or charter school technology. And so for me, part of that oldness of my life was I had tracking, in elementary and middle school, college-bound kids versus non-college-bound kids. And we got away from that in this country 25 or 30 years ago. And just in Arkansas, I think 60,000 high school graduates in the state, about 50% will go to a 4-year school. And you can say, well, that's a problem, and I would agree, but it's still a reality. And a lot of that is, what work will they do? What's the motivation to keep them in school, raise our graduation rates? And one of those things, in my view, is integrating career technical education, skilled workforce, stacking of credentials down in K through 12 education, and stop fighting about how one finances that between the higher ed budget in your state and the K through 12 budget in your state. We have to do a better job of doing both. And in Arkansas, I've seen a couple of things I really like. That is lifetime learning supportive, because we're going to have to be more flexible, as Kristen points out in her comments. One, Walmart, I think you have 226 of your training stores and centers around the United States. I visited one the other day, and all that training is delivered on iPads and is changing in real time for your future managers as they're in the process. I thought that was the sign of the kind of investment you've got to make in corporate America. So how do we support that in the private? in the public sector. And I think it's, again, integrating this skilled workforce in the K through 12 system, so you have a better employee that comes straight out of high school into an apprenticeship, into a corporate work environment, and that they're ready to learn, they have the social skills to learn. And I think in turn that also will improve the 4-year degree person that comes to Walmart. John Deere in Arkansas is doing an outstanding bit of work on that with Arkansas State University, where I see them providing in that skill work arena all the equipment necessary to attract people to come to the school and get the education, and that relieves the private or the public sector on making that big capital investment in the latest equipment for them to learn to work on. So I'm here to listen. I want to hear all these bright ideas today, but I believe that flexibility and breaking down the barriers to traditional forms of education are really important, and making sure that the goal when someone turns 18 is the pursuit of happiness and not just one direction, which is headed off to a 4-year degree only as a solution. And thanks for the invitation to be here.
Thanks, Christoph. I promise I'll come back to you, but Laura Tyson was invoked in that response, so I wanted to jump over to her and just sort of ask about how Washington is engaged on these topics now, disruption of the workforce, or not engaged. I think you might have some interesting views on that. So talk to us a little bit about the role that the federal government could be playing here that it isn't playing, and how you kind of view the future of this from a Washington perspective. Not that you're in Washington anymore, but you know it.
So, Ben, you're starting with the presumption that anyone in Washington might care what I think at this point, which I am really largely out of the Washington sort of environment right now. I am involved, and I do think there are many interesting things going on at the level of states. I actually think one of the most interesting things going on in the country is in the state of Colorado with LinkedIn, Microsoft, and something called Work America that's coming out of the Markle Foundation. I think it's very much along the lines of thinking about skilling and upskilling and changing education, and not just education in the sense of what the content is, but for many, many people, this is about how you network into understanding where the jobs are, how you get on lists for those jobs, how you compete for those jobs, can you move for those jobs? There's a whole set of issues of mobility. So I'm going to get to something that I think I wanted to add here, not that's focused on Washington, but it's a challenge. So I tend to think of the future in a little more negative terms than Susan and Kristen. I think whenever we talk about disruption and reskilling, we are missing the fact that going back to the Luddites and everything you mentioned, Susan, there were individuals, there were communities, there were families, there were generations of people who were adversely affected by this, adversely affected. Their real living standard did not rise, it declined. So I think we do have to think about, now I think Mary talked about the need to close the gap. I worry very much that the technology itself is actually increasing the gap. It's increasing the gap. And I worked on a study with Nobel laureate Michael Spence, and we looked at the effect of automation on income inequality in the United States over the last 30 years. A very, very significant effect. This comes from skill bias technological change. It made the people in this room better off. It made lots of people worse off by taking out middle income jobs. So you have labor displacing technological change, skill bias technological change, feeding into income inequality. Now I will note that when Kristen, I think, talked about the 3 things people care about in their lives, we live in a market economy. People earn their income from their work. That is what they earn their income from. You cannot say that for most people. Having an adequate level of income from your work is not the major challenge. It's the major challenge for them and for their family. And I think what I worry about going forward is that the technology, by taking out middle jobs, by benefiting high-income jobs, is really creating the possibility that we have a significant fraction of the workforce with the future of work not earning a level of income for their family that is consistent with our social norms, that's consistent with social stability. So what do we do about that? What do we do about that? That, to my mind, is a major challenge. So then you have to start to talk about things which are certainly not being talked about right now in Washington. They're not about, certainly skills is necessary, but it's just not sufficient. It's just not sufficient. So what about, I'll invoke a Milton Friedman here. What about a negative income tax along with a very progressive consumption tax? That would be a way to begin to handle the income challenge for those families who are going to have, they're going to have adequate skills, but not really to get into those top income generating jobs. Maybe they're stuck and their family's stuck in middle income jobs that aren't going any place from the point of view of generating income. The other thing would be the services that such workers need. And here I will just go to my final point. And this is, again, states are doing some interesting things on this. Disruption, an increasing share of workers are going to end up in independent form. That is, they're not employed full-time by an organization, an employee organization. They work with many employers. They work with many employers. The employers have lots of market power in that negotiation between the individual worker and the organization, setting the terms of work, the wages, the leave, the health insurance, the pension insurance, everything. In the absence of organizations like guilds to organize worker interests dealing with large employers who are separate, we have to think about benefits that are coming really through the much maligned social safety net. So I'll end by saying right now in Washington, it looks like if we do anything, it's going to be going in the wrong direction, taking away the provision of an individual market for health insurance in a world of independent workers growing is just the wrong way to go.
I knew we could get into an Affordable Care Act discussion here at some point, so appreciate that. And just as a privilege of the moderator, the reason I screwed up his congressional district is that I thought of French Hill, and then I thought of French Lick, and then I thought of Indiana. That's how that went in my head, so apologies for that. But now we'll go to Christophe.
Thanks a lot. My name is Christophe. I'm French, by the way.
That's why they're sitting next to each other.
I work for the International Labour Organization. As some of you may know, this is the oldest international organization. We were created 100 years ago at the time of the League of Nations. And we have a very, very unique structure because we are tripartite, bringing together government, but also workers and employers as part of the governance structure of the organization. So obviously we dedicate quite a lot of efforts and thought to this issue. We have put together a global commission on the future of work, which is just starting to work, and which will, of course, will try to better understand the transformation taking place in the world of work. Perhaps one word regarding technology and taking a broader perspective. Obviously, technology is very much at the center of the discussion, but this is not by far the only issue under consideration in many parts of the world. And there are much more serious issues to be dealt with by many governments, and I could name a few: climate change, of course, the demographic changes, including aging, migration, you name it. So just to put a bit of a perspective on this issue. A word about jobs. We believe that job is much better than a paycheck. And we need to keep that in mind. It's in many ways, in many places, the link between communities where you develop personal connections. So we should not forget this dimension. On technologies, technologies have created a lot of jobs, we know, new industries, but has also been disruptive. That's the discussion today, creating wide diversity of employment patterns, and that's something we need to of course look at very carefully, because it also brings a lot of insecurity for workers all around the world. Perhaps one word regarding perhaps what is in our view one of the major challenges in relation to the future of work and automation is the debate regarding the gains from technologies And I think there is little debate in that regard. And I think we need to pay much more attention to the way we ensure that there is a much better sharing of the substantial technology gains. Otherwise, well, we know what's going to happen. And there is already a growing sense of unfairness in that regard in the world. And this is linked also to the widening levels of income inequality around the world. So I would just put that on the table because I think it's an issue on which we need to pay, again, much more attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Guy?
Hi, so my name is Guy Hilton. I'm actually a Chief Marketing Officer for Startup Nation Central. We're an NGO based in Israel. And what we do is we connect NGOs, global companies, even governments to Israeli innovation in order to help them figure out and solve whatever challenges, whatever pressing challenges they have. So we have a very, I'd say, horizontal view of everything that happens in the tech sectors, also across the globe, and also in conjunction with what we're doing in Israel and the way we see also the future workforce in our own country. When I look at what scares me, so to speak, it's the, I would say, it's the multiple forces that are at work when we look at the future workforce. Just think about the different aspects. On one hand, we have the classic business structure. On the other hand, we have millennials, and they have a total different view of how they'd like to work. So, for example, they have very little loyalty to current employers. They put their own goals in front of the company goals in most cases. Then you look at what are the training paradigms that are needed today and in the future in order to make sure that these things come to fruition. So how do you retrain, reskill, upskill? How do you create a set, not just when they come ready to work, but starting from, as I sent from Arkansas, from K to 12. So the magic word up till now was STEM. Let's all invest in STEM education, and by that, we'll get them done. But that's not true. STEM would get us so far, let's say, short-term solution. Mid-term, long-term solution, we need to combine STEM with social skills, with processing skills, with analytical skills. That would, all in conjunction, would actually make someone fit for this new world. And we have to understand that the paradigm of once and done, whether it's in education, whether it's in potentially even employment, is a long gone thing. We're looking at probably serial employment elements that will actually move people from one place to another, even in the same country, and they'll have to figure out on a 5-10 year period how they actually move up or horizontally in their career. And the fact that climbing up the corporate ladder is not going to be probably viable in 10 to 15 years. What excites me though is it's a huge opportunity to have a fresh look at all the educational paradigms we all grew up on. How do you actually go and train the K children? How do you actually, what's high school now going to be offering? And it's not going to be the regular, as we said, analog type of discussion, but rather new ways of creating people who are not just there for the degree or who are taught, like, pardon my French, robots to think in a very clear mind, but rather someone who sees holistically and also has a lot of focus on social skills.
Are we worried about offending robots here? Is that why you said pardon my French? Because I think one of the goals here is if we're going to give these jobs to robots, that they can't be offended by us. And then, of course, if they are offended by us, that's when the overlords take over and we're all screwed. But that's for later in the discussion. Diana wanted to jump in here, so I will turn it over.
Hi, and thank you very much. I represent the Liebherr Group. We are a holding company that has 30 subsidiaries across 35 countries. And I just want to jump on what Mr. Hilton was saying about it's not just the reskilling and the analytics, but it's also the culture and your cultural changing and the cultural adaptation. And so you have to be training for that human capital and building alongside technology and seeing how that's going to produce a more productive workforce. Something that we're incredibly proud of at the Liebherr Group is that we actually hold a fully paid, globally sourced internship program. And so what we do, we've built this over the last couple of years, and this year we had applications from over 60 countries. And so we recruit from all across the globe, including obviously the US, but look into especially countries with economies that might be struggling. The program started off in Greece, but what we're doing is that we're placing these interns into our subsidiaries, making sure that they are not only getting the skills training and getting the exposure that they need so that they can grow within the business, but then they get to know the culture. They get to know what we stand for. We get to create our own diverse pipeline, which will at the end of the day make us all a lot stronger by knowing that we are only creative as our diverse backgrounds. And so that is something that is incredibly important to us, and I know that many companies around the table are doing such things, especially as you're talking about not only apprenticeship, Congressman Hill, but as we're looking at the internships as well. Something that's also a part of our social responsibility platform is also future-proofing some of the other nonprofits and organizations that we work with. And so we're very lucky and proud to work with a slew of nonprofits that either work with maternal mental health or the refugee crisis. And one point I want to make, we work very closely with an organization called the Home Project, which has built shelters for unaccompanied minors in Greece. But not only is it because of the food and shelter that we're supporting, but we're actually also teaching the kids to code. And so you have these migrants and unaccompanied children who have now left their homes. They've found themselves in this new space. And what are we doing? We're trying to future-proof them so that they can be competitive, even though they've had so much adversity that they've faced. And so as a social responsibility element and how we approach it, it's really investing in that generation as well and how we look at this.
Thank you for that. We have a representative from Watson here, and I'm very interested in that. And I was trying to remember the other day, didn't Watson go up against Ken Jennings in Jeopardy, the great Jeopardy champion? And who won that? I couldn't remember.
Watson won by a large margin.
Oh, well, I guess that tells us the future we have in store for us, but please.
Okay. Thank you. So my name is Cheng Chao. I come from IBM Research. I'm a research scientist, so I'm kind of representing the people like make this problem. That's the reason why I'm gonna start with excitement, like why we're excited about the future. I think the largest excitement for the future is just for any technology development is we're gonna create not only just more jobs, but also more interesting jobs. In terms of interesting, like with this wave of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, automation, robotics, we're gonna get rid of most of jobs, like repetitive jobs. The future job is gonna more with design, with creativity, so that's gonna be, and also gonna be more flexible. So it's gonna be interesting job for everyone. And also gonna be more jobs, right? Think about all these new technologies, the same as all the technology development in the history. Surely it's gonna eliminate many jobs, but also at the same time, I believe we're gonna create more jobs, like jobs we have never heard about. For example, for the artificial intelligence, not only to mention relatively high-level jobs where you need more software developer, data scientists to design architecture, we also need more like common jobs. For example, we need more people to generate the data, to label the data, so that we can use that for the machine learning things. For the Internet of Things, we also need more jobs just to deploy those sensors everywhere, to maintain those sensors, to build more infrastructures, to make sure the flow of the data between those remote sensors and also our central computers or the computers running on the cloud. If you talk about more advanced technologies like the 3D printing, it's going to be a good opportunity to move people from those traditional like manufacturing jobs and more in the design space. Like everyone got the capability of freedom to design their things, and also you can say something even already starting from now, right? I'm in the semiconductor industry, so back in 10-15 years ago, I mean, you buy a PC, you're going to use just a kind of common set of CPU for every one of that. But now the manufacturing part of this integrated circuit has been pretty much automated. But at the same time, every company, just because of this technology development, they're gonna have the flexibility to design their own chips, right? All the smartphones, they have different chips in the smartphone, and that's not the case in PC, just because of the technology development. And so that's the reason why all the companies are going to hire more people just to design those chips and also work more closely with foundries to make sure their design going to really be realized in the product. So what's the risk? I think the biggest risk is compared with previous technology development. we have two problems. One is the scale, right? So now we have a pretty much globalized economy, so the job displacement going to happen at a much larger scale. We may eliminate a huge amount of job, and more because of this speed of this technology development. It can also going to happen in relatively short period of time. So that's going to be a very large challenge. In solution in here at Concordia, we talk about the collaboration between private sector and public sector. I think one thing is the private sector needs to get more involved with education, right? It's for the private sector, we need to take initiative in order to shape our talent pipeline in the future. And there's something wrong in the current education system. Just a simple observation by scientists. If you go to any top engineering school in the United States, at least 50% graduate students are international students. So why our current education system in the United States fail to attract the best talents to a career of science and engineering? And another thing I think is necessary is considering the time and scale of this job displacement. We also need help from the public sector for our workers to cover the gap between, like, they make these transitions from one job to another. I don't see that existing in the current system.
Thank you for that. I want to come back to you a little bit later on the question of AI and the Elon Musk concerns about the rise of AI and the danger it poses. If anybody wants to jump in on that, I would be interested in your thoughts on it, because it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about. Saeed.
Yes, hi. My name is Saeed Al-Naj. I'm the VP of Technology at Project Concern International. We are an international development organization operating in 16 countries, focusing on healthcare, hunger, and hardship. And so my goal is always to think about how technology will impact poor people in developing countries. And I just want to tell you what the things that scare me, and I would also agree with Professor Laura Tyson's on your opinion, and I'll share some simple facts. One is that the cars, currently the car utilization is about 4%. The economists amongst us would know that this is the least utilized asset that we have. So once we have a conversions of three very important technologies, artificial intelligence, electrical vehicles, and a slew of other computer vision and so on, and in very few years, in fact, right now, we can have cars that can drive humans around. So the next, if we look at history from a technology perspective, we had the mainframe operating system started by IBM, then we had the mini frames, then we had the PC operating system, followed by the mobile operating system. And the next important mass operating system is going to be the car operating system. And so all is this to say there's a lot that's going on here with cars being computers on wheels, very smart computers on wheels. We will have a displacement of about 10 million people. One, there will be disruption in the oil industry. We are not going to need as much oil as we have right now. Second, there'll be a disruption in the car manufacturing industry, because we're not going to need the combustion cars that use about 2,000 parts more than the electrical motors. Then and it follows, the parking industry and so on. Many industries will be disrupted, all resulting in some 10 million jobs lost in the US. And this is in a fairly short period of time. So this is, I think, a big change, and this is something that scares me and also makes me think about how that impacts developing countries, and I'll come to that later. Let's see. I do agree there will be definitely new jobs, a lot of them, but they will require high skills. And the low-skilled jobs are going to be pushed down, and people with low skills, their income will be pushed further down, and they will be displaced, and they will face hardship. So that's one thing that we need to focus on. I think there was talk about education and so on. There's a lot to be said there, not just about the the STEM and the cultural aspects of it, but I think the other important aspect of it is that we need to change the human mind in terms of thinking. We think in linear ways. And what's going to happen, technology will be changing at an incredible pace where we have to be constantly learning and in a very exponential way. And what that means is we need to train the new kids in ways that they adapt to change and technological change very fast. So we are, I think there will be a lot of talk about, yes, there will be jobs, and I agree. And yes, in 1900, we had 40% of the US population working in agriculture. In 2000, we had it at 2%. And yes, the US is powerful and strong as it is right now, but there are a lot of human lives that were impacted, infected along the way, and we need to think about that. So when I think about the 10 million jobs of low-skilled people, it makes me think about the opioid epidemic that is probably brewing as we speak if there isn't action on the policy side. That said, I also see that there is future and bright future in many ways. Technology offers a lot of other bright side to it, and there is no way of avoiding it. If we look at 44% utilization of cars, if we go into 40% utilization, there will be impact on the GDP, the global GDP of about 1.4%. So there's a lot to be said there. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll go maybe later on talk about the impact on developing countries.
Thanks for that. And Sarah, I promise I'll come right back to you, but I just want to throw out the 10 million job loss number and see if anybody wants to take issue with that and the kind of pessimistic view that we are due for significant job losses because of some of these new technologies, particularly in driverless cars. I'm thinking about the trucking industry and obviously Uber drivers who could be out of jobs eventually if driverless cars work. I mean, is there a counterpoint to that? Like, actually, we're going to gain X million jobs and we should all be super excited about this? Right there.
Hi, Jeremy Kroll. I would say there are 3 million unfilled jobs in cybersecurity, so let's work with 7 now. 7 million we have to fill.
Oh, I agree with you. I'm not saying that.
And I'm not.
Yeah.
What
I'm saying.
You want us to debate? I'm just giving you a number.
Low-skilled jobs, those type of jobs will disappear. There will be plenty of jobs. There will be no shortage for human beings. That's for sure. The problem with it is those human beings need to have mid to high skills, and that's the challenge. Getting that transition and living through that period of time where we're able to, like in 1900, we had 40% of the population working in farms, and now we have in 2000 or 2010, we had 2%. So how do we do that transition without impacting the lives of those human beings? There are tons of jobs in technology will create an incredible amount of jobs. Can we fill them? We have a shortage of about 100,000 doctors in the US alone, right? And so technology can help facilitate that. And artificial intelligence has a lot of applications that help facilitate that. No question about it. I think the question is, what do we do about the 10 million? That is the question.
I think we had a comment right.
So I just want to make a truly economic comment here, which is, I don't think economists would disagree with the fact that we will have jobs. Okay, that's not the issue. Labor market's clear. This is an issue about the wage level and the quality of jobs. The quantity of jobs, I am willing to say that we're going to have a future where people are employed. My concern is what is the quality and wage levels of a large fraction of the jobs. A second thing that you've raised is the speed and the breadth of transition. If society can figure out a way to sort of handle the pain, because, and that really goes to the two of you talking about, these are large numbers, it's maybe happening faster than we think. But I really think when in these discussions always, it's important to distinguish the number of jobs from the quality of jobs, the distribution of skills and the distribution of income or wages. I think it's really important.
Right here. So I can't see your name plate, so you can just tell us who you are.
No problem. Good afternoon. Assemblyman Michael Blake in the Bronx, New York. So I think we've been talking about jobs, which obviously are important, but and also, as Laura mentions, it's about wages as well. But I think we also have to dive deeper in terms of the growing question initially around inequality and the gap that is exacerbated because of automation. When you look at how data suggested from the Joint Center, about 20 jobs that are associated with automation in the 10 to 20 years, that's about 4.8 million jobs that could be lost in the black community. When you exacerbate that and you look at what the Federal Reserve indicated, that college-educated whites in a 20-year span saw their income go up essentially 86% versus college-educated blacks saw it go down 55%. So it's not just about the job component, it's about the deeper conversation we're having as it relates to inequality itself. And so there has to be a few different pieces that we examine. First, yes, there's the skills question and how do you start early on, which we haven't really talked about how education on the early aspect has to be a part of this conversation, right? When you look at the work that's happening from the Eagle Academy and others that have been focusing very early in terms of that engagement, when you look at Green Bronx Machine, which is showing young people how to use exercise bikes to create energy to then create jobs, there's a component that happens in that aspect. Then you have to talk about the young people that are disconnected, that 36% of youth, 16 to 24 that don't have a job, they don't feel an opportunity. We represent the most diverse community in the country in the South Bronx. We have a lot of young people that regularly are not just wondering if we're gonna have a job, they don't want the part-time job, they don't want anything, they don't feel like there's any opportunity at all. And so we've tactically connected. We have a great collaboration with Here to Here and DreamYard, Judy Diamond, Abby Jo Siegel, and others, of saying, how do you find that individual, that young person, and connect them to the opportunity, connect them to the employer, and make it practical. We say regularly in our community, your block should not block your blessing, your zip code should not deny your destiny. And how do you get very tactical and when we're examining what's happening as it relates to automation? And so, yes, the jobs are important. It's also about the pipeline that's been created. The Knowledge House, which focuses on that tech pipeline. And when we talk about, someone mentioned coding earlier. Yes, coding is one component, but how do you connect it to all the different types of jobs that are relevant in this? Automation, sometimes we talk about how it may seem just like the driverless cars. Well, it's also automation when you go into the CVS and you see people that are going to cashless opportunities. And tied to this is the policy. And we can't ignore how policies have impact. We have a change that we've done here with minority women-owned businesses now being paid in 15 days instead of 30 days. Why does that matter? Because when you're in a changing economy and you're having to wait to get paid, it has impact on your employees. When your employees are struggling as it relates to wages, it has impact as well. So I think we have to make sure that we're making this a tactical conversation. It's not about just a job, it's about someone's life. And how do we have a comprehensive conversation, how automation has that kind of impact in the shifting narrative that's happening in our communities right now?
Yeah, I would just interject that in my experience, those CVS, yeah, very good. Those CVS automated tellers are terrible and they're taking them out instead of keeping them in. I think that's happening in a number of different places because you wind up having to call somebody over to help you out with them anyway. So win one for the humans on that one. Susan, I think you wanted to jump in there on a point and then we'll come back over here.
I will. I want to just reiterate, I think that this issue of wages and people will have jobs, but what kind of jobs are those? Do they have opportunity? Does it support a middle class life? And that actually matters on multiple dimensions, not least of which is economic, that in the United States, over 70% of GDP growth comes from consumer spending. If all the income is going to the top 1%, they simply don't spend the same share of it as if that income is distributed across a large swath of the middle class. So I certainly don't want to downplay the impact on wages. But I do have to, as an economist, pick a bone with the technologists about the pace of adoption. Like, yes, there are autonomous vehicles. They can drive around in controlled environments. But there is something called insurance. There is regulation. There are a lot of policy roadblocks that need to be overcome before we're going to get massive adoption of autonomous vehicles in the United States. And even once those policy barriers are overcome, then there's a cultural barrier. Like, I sort of like driving my car to work, right? There's that, and I'm a woman, for goodness sake. It's like, I think there are plenty of people who view driving in a car as something else. So just as it took 70 years actually for agriculture in the US to go from roughly half of the population down to 2%, I can imagine 70 years hence that maybe we all will get into autonomous vehicles that are driving around the roads continuously instead of being parked in garages. But I would caution that when you look at the evidence to date, adoption of technology, whether it's by businesses or consumers, has not really picked up speed.
Thanks for that. We had one comment over here, and then I'll come back to Sarah, because I'm cognizant of everybody getting a chance. I'm sorry. I swear you're next.
I was just going to pick and choose from all those things.
Then jump off. No, you go, and then we'll come over here.
No, it's totally fine. I'm Sarah Heck, and I am here representing Stripe. We are a company that provides financial software primarily in payments, but an expanding array of products. And I think both what you said, Michael and Susan, about both opportunity and consumer base, our goal is to expand the GDP of the internet. We know that the way that people are going to consume products across the world is changing drastically. And a lot of this has to do with people being able to sell their products on the internet in a space that creates opportunity across demographic barriers, across geographic barriers. And so, I think that the biggest risk is opportunity. I think that if we don't lower the country barriers, the currency barriers, the ability for people to get payments in and pay them out in ways that support marketplaces, whether it's Uber or Lyft or Airbnb that are new, or it is the woman in Missouri who is now able to sell her quilts online and does shipments all across the world. I mean, this is how people are going to make their livelihood. But I think that the real opportunity is these tools, and technology actually enables these tools. So something else that we do at Stripe that isn't primarily in the payment space is we have a product called Atlas that allows people from anywhere in the world to incorporate and get a bank account in the United States as Delaware C Corporation and be able to be entrepreneurs. And we've incorporated just about 10% of the Delaware C corporations last year through our product, but with people from 125 countries. So I know that talent is out there, but opportunity isn't. And so I think we really need to have a conversation about what are the tools that are allowing people to be a part of an economy, to create jobs. There's just incredible stories of people that are coming from the most adverse backgrounds, whether it is in the American Rust Belt or it's in Vietnam or it's in Sri Lanka. But they have the talent. They are learning to code online. The ability to acquire these skills is out there. It's just our ability to scale the tools to help them grow. So I think that there is a lot that can be done to create a well-lit path for entrepreneurs. I mean, we see studies, youth demographics across the world are going up, and CSIS and the International Youth Foundation did an incredible study a couple of years ago that basically said the number one thing that young people want in this world is access to entrepreneurship. They realize what's coming, they see the skills that they need to have, and they want to create their own future and the future of their peer group. And so what are we doing to enable folks, not just here in the U.S., through the really important things like skill building and education at every age, but the ability to make sure that you can get a company incorporated in less than a day. I mean, that's certainly not something that we're seeing across the world anywhere. How are we making the bureaucracy of business streamlined and scalable for people?
Thanks. You mentioned that woman in Missouri who sells quilts. I bought one of those quilts. It was, I didn't really like it. There was a comment over here, and then we'll continue around. I'm cognizant I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak.
Thank you. Duncan Wood from the Wilson Center. I've heard a lot so far about sort of economic, social, cultural implications of this change, but the thing that scares me is actually the political implications. And I think we're already living it. I think we're seeing it every single day. We've seen it in the past electoral cycle here in the United States. And the reason why I make this connection is just because of a very simple video interview that I saw online recently with Michigan-based automobile workers who were being asked about, what's wrong with the US economy? And their number one target was NAFTA. And when the interviewer said, in fact, we can prove to you that trade hasn't taken the jobs away, it's in fact automation, they said, oh, we love the robots. The robots do the jobs we don't want to do. They do the dangerous jobs, they do the dirty jobs. And there's a disconnect there. So I think that we're not going to see a Luddite reaction in the sense of smashing machinery. We're seeing the reaction already. NAFTA is one, and of course anti-immigration is the other one. And so that's what sort of scares me the most. And it's also because of the kind of work that we do at the Wilson Center, what excites me. And so that's why we've launched a project trying to find policy solutions to this on a regional collaborative basis between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, trying to find ways in which the three countries, but more importantly, the three societies can actually work together on finding solutions.
So, fascinating point, Duncan, that our anger in this dislocations is kind of focused in the wrong places at this point. But I want to keep going around to Oliver.
Hi, so Oliver Libby. I run a venture firm here in New York and an incubator for students starting social enterprises. So I want to draw on a couple of points that were made earlier for the thing that scares me and really focus on time. I think one of the biggest things that doesn't get enough airtime in this discussion is the velocity of change that can be anticipated for workers going into the future. You will not have a generational timeline, a career that you train for and then start, and that is substantially similar for 25 to 30 years. You may have 7 or 8 different core skill sets that are deployed, and the problem, and I'll just talk about America for a minute, not even the rest of the world, is the stamina. The downside risk protection for the average family is measured in weeks, not the months or even years it takes to reskill and upskill successfully for each job transition in the serial job economy. So that job velocity challenge is very significant. I know you mentioned that maybe we could get public sector help for that. I don't think it'll be enough. But I do think that it then kind of moves into 2 things that kind of excite me about the future of work. The first is changes in education, not just in K through 12, although Congressman, I agree with you, that's crucial, but also in lifelong education and who takes responsibility for paying for that and administering that and making sure that the flow of capital, a student paying the teacher, is not necessarily the only way that capital flows in education, and also that various sectors, public sector, private sector, education, media even, take on their various parts of the upskilling and reskilling ecosystem. And the last thing I'll end with that excites me, especially as we get a chance to work with literally thousands of entrepreneurs every year, is the idea that we are moving back towards distribution of resources in local communities, and specifically to the future of work. That means new small to medium business starts that bring things like localized energy, food and agriculture, water, education, essentially redistributing entire industries and resource spaces that were consolidated in the 50s, 60s, and 70s back out into communities so that we can create opportunities, we can make sure that we have sustainable local communities without taking anything away from the march of technology, which I think is unstoppable.
Thanks for that, Finn.
Hi, so my name's Finn Brunton. I'm actually a slightly odd character here. I'm an ex-technologist, but I work now as a historian. So I specialize in scary things. Like I bring bleak news from the past.
Good, please scare us all. I don't think we have enough terror in this thing yet, because a lot of it terrifies me, so bring it on.
So I wanted actually to begin with another quote from Keynes that I feel like is very relevant to this, from 1926, when he, I think, perfectly summarized the problem that he saw facing economics in 26, which was how to combine 3 things: economic efficiency, social justice, and individual liberty. How do you actually conjoin the ability of the market to function well with the ability of fundamental social contracts and human welfare to be respected, with the ability of individuals to actually make free decisions in some form of open space? And this is a challenge that I've been fascinated to hear all of these different perspectives and pieces of information that is extraordinarily difficult to see towards the end of right now. I did a lot of research into the Luddites years ago. One of the really striking things about their experience is that they're often caricatured as being anti-technology, which they weren't. They were against a breaking of an existing social contract. And it wasn't even a good social contract. Like, it wasn't as though life as a homespun weaver in rural England at that period was a good life. But it was nonetheless like a coherent deal, right, that you had with like a set of different people in the community. And when someone brings in an automated loom and that deal falls to pieces, there's suddenly a crisis on the horizon that has to be faced. And often, in a way that I hope does not prefigure the future, the violence was not visited upon the machines, but upon the people. And with that in mind, I want to bring up a really, 2 ideas that haven't been much discussed in the context of a way of looking at this future, which is, what if, in fact, the future of automation is fantastically better from the perspective of efficiency. We've had the example of self-driving vehicles, right? Like anytime I see a parked car, it makes me weep. Like that car shouldn't be sitting there. That car should be running 24 hours a day at top efficiency, constantly involved in tasks. By the same token, the automation of agriculture. We've already seen agriculture as a job sector, as has been said, shrink dramatically. Indoor agriculture is an extraordinary area right now. I do a lot of research related to blockchains and digital currency. People are working on blockchains to authenticate the flow of food from farm to table, but they're doing so in the context of automated indoor farming, right? Where you get 15 crop cycles a year, you save almost 100% of your water, almost. You save vastly on fertilizer, no pesticides, et cetera, and it's much better for the food because like machines never pick their noses, you know, or like come to work with a cold. There's no point of contamination anywhere in the production chain. And I say this to suggest that like this is great. Like this means much less expensive food calories, much higher quality, local, less shipping, et cetera. Except of course for the fact that again, it completely eviscerates important jobs for the most vulnerable and precarious people in the workforce. So with this in mind, I'd like to raise these two issues for further discussion. One of them was mentioned earlier, although I'll put it in a slightly different way, which is the idea of the universal basic income, which is a very problematic and complicated idea, not a magic bullet, but it's one that's extremely popular among Silicon Valley people that I know, along with whether or not AI is going to destroy all life on Earth. But, and the other is unions. We've had very little discussion of unions as a force in all this. And one of the really interesting questions that we face right now is whether or not the union movement is actually looking not at its end. There's been much talk of that, about the senescence of public unions, but instead at the beginning of something very different. Unions that can operate transnationally, that can authenticate and verify the behaviors of different groups. There's new possibilities for solidarity. There's new possibilities for group negotiation. That could potentially lead to a much more equitable and reasonable automation process into the future.
Thanks for that. I guess, you know, if we're all going to be destroyed by the machines, we should at least have a guaranteed basic income before they destroy us. So yes, we have some, you know, money in our pockets. Byron.
So start with the biggest opportunity. The biggest opportunity comes from the fact that work is solving problems. And the last I checked, we're not running out of problems. But that's a serious point. I mean, work is building things and fixing things. It's inventing them and improving them. It's educating people, entertaining them, caring for them. Work is not, we're not running out of work to do. If we run out of work to do, that will represent a profound failure of our social institutions. And by the way, it won't be a failure of our technology. It'll be a failure of our institutions, a failure of our incentives, and a failure of our imagination. So there is a lot of work to do. And if you look at the technology, it's really not the problem. In general, technology can create jobs as well as eradicate them. I would say with AI in particular, AI is not even neutral. To me, AI is a technology that wants to augment people. Most of the extreme improvements in AI and things like classification are parts of jobs, they're not entire jobs. So it wants to augment people, and if it doesn't, if it replaces them instead, it'll be because of the way we've organized our institutions. So to double click on that, the problem, well, people talk about education and training. That's right. There are shortcomings in that. I don't want to rehash what everyone said. But focus on employment itself and hiring, screening. You know, 30 years ago in this country, companies hired just loads of people straight out of high school, out of college. They did not expect them to come with highly specialized skills, you know, a certain level of preparation. They expected to train them. Now we've gone from about 50% of new jobs, sort of hiring being entry-level hiring, to 7% of hiring is now entry-level hiring. 93% of hiring is some specification of what someone needs to have done for the last decade or more of their lives. We're looking for someone with these experiences, with this particular degrees. That's 93% of hiring now. So if you specify in your demand signal what a person needs to have done the last 10 years of their life, until Elon Musk invents a time machine, that's not really a demand signal, is it? That's a search algorithm. That means you're either in or you're out. People can learn new things. And by the way, one of the best applications of AI should be to help people learn new things. That is a place where AI could have massive upside. So the question is, why don't we have the incentives? Why is it more profitable to use AI in unnatural ways to replace people than to use it in actually extremely natural ways to educate people and to build their capacities? And if we want to understand that question, we do need to look not only at the institutions and what companies do in hiring and training, we need to look at our capital markets and our accounting code and our tax code. So three of those together are massively biased towards automation and away from training and away from labor. Because if you solve the same problem with a machine or with software, you can capitalize that. You spend the same amount of cash in, cash out with workers and training, well, that's an expense. So your earnings are going to look like less. Your stock price is going to be lower. Your executives are going to be paid less, even though fundamentally you have an equal way of doing that between labor and the like. Our financial sector is basically a wall on what should be a most fundamental role of financial intermediation between the present and the future, right, to invest in new skills. A lot of that is government, and that's inclusive, but it's got no performance element to it, the government part. And the private sector part treats it as a consumer loan, like you're going to buy a television set, and what's your FICO score? Whereas it really should be more like a small business loan, which is what's your business plan for this new piece of capital equipment, because it should allow you to earn more in the future. It's completely backwards. And you then have our political system, which probably has the biggest institutional failures of all, which amount to really death by 1,000 cuts for working class people, poor people who are trying to move up the ladder. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, first of all, that the guild politics that suffuses all labor market discussion so much that we don't even notice, right? Why is it that automation eliminates low-wage jobs and commoditizes middle-wage jobs? Why doesn't it help us break up very complex high-wage jobs? Someone mentioned 100,000 physician shortage in a particular place. Why doesn't it take those jobs so that nurse practitioners and community health workers aided by AI can provide those services? The reason it doesn't is because although labor unions representing the working class have been massively weakened politically, labor unions representing the professional class, doctors, lawyers, and the like, are incredibly strong. And the state medical associations impose scope of practice laws that make it impossible, illegal, for nurses, nurse practitioners, and others to actually perform services that they could perform. So if you want to know how to use the technology, you could break up many of these high-wage jobs, many of which aren't filled, and create millions of middle-wage jobs. But it's not the technology that stops us from doing that. It's the politics. And finally, on the politics, the NIMBYism, not big government, but small government, that has little zoning boards and community organizations that stop working class people, poor people, from living anywhere close to the jobs that exist. So if you take the Bay Area, if the Bay Area had the population density of Paris, there would be 5 million more people living there. We know for a fact from Raj Chetty's work and others that their social mobility and that of their children would be massively more. We know that the tens of billions of dollars of wealth being generated in the Bay Area would be going into people's pockets to build buildings and public transit and to service those instead of going into the mutual funds of baby boomers who happen to win the location lottery of having inherited a home in the Bay Area. So we know these things, and this is true to a lesser extent around the country. And so it's not that we don't have those solutions. We actually could. And finally, to point to where the solutions lie, how we could. So, you know, someone mentioned disconnected youth and this challenge. So youth that are not in school, not in work. They did an experiment in Albuquerque a few years ago, and it's built into this thing called Talent Albuquerque now, where they said, what if employers could hire based on skills and consider disconnected youth that way rather than their resumes? It turns out 30% of them had skill levels at the level of college graduates, but would never have gotten a chance. I've seen, so I founded Opportunity at Work, which is really trying to fix some of the labor market pieces of this so that if you can do the job, you can get the job, and have a way that you can be screened in based on your performance and your skills rather than screened out based on your your academic pedigree or your work history. And we see it all the time. Secretaries in companies that have, little businesses with 10, 15 people, they have IT, but they don't have IT departments. If they've got a knack, they're going to be the IT department. But go try for them to apply for a job of all these open jobs, right, in IT, they're not even going to get a look. So we know there's a huge amount of talent there. 40% of IT workers today don't have bachelor's degrees. My father was one of them. In 1970, he was working as a shipping clerk in a factory, and he saw an ad for COBOL, IBM's big product of the time, and he said, if you learn that, you can write your own ticket. He did. He quit his job. He studied for 5 months, and he actually got a job, and that was the path of our family's entry into the middle class. And by the way, if someone like my dad tried to do that today, he probably wouldn't be able to do it, because no one would think, why would anyone think that he would be a great programmer? No reason to think he never worked in an office. And finally, Susan, you talked about that in 70 years, we made a transition from 50% of the workforce in agriculture to 2%. But actually, there was about a 35-year period, about half of that time, where we went from 50% to about 12, 15%, right? So we're never going to see a third of the jobs in this country go away in a 30-year period. That was an incredible change. So what happened? Yes, there was pain. Yes, there were problems. But what happened was we rose to the challenge for new institutions. For example, we had a high school movement that we went from 1909 to 1939. We went from having 9% of American teenagers attending high school to 79% attending high school. In 30 years, there was no Department of Education. It was a movement across the country with employers and communities and the like. So we've done that before. I think we can do it again. And if you're thinking that you can't, ask yourself, if you think these jobs are going to go away, ask yourself, what are you assuming about our institutions being the same and our institutions being unchangeable? And why are you assuming that? And if you think a technology is going to kill jobs, use your imagination. How could it create jobs? And if you think we can't do this alone, our company can't, our government can't, you're probably right. So think about how you could do it together with others represented around the table.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it was very good. We've got PayPal in the house here. Usman.
Thank you. So I've really enjoyed this discussion, and Byron did part of what I was going to do, which was summarize the massive amount of issues that have been discussed around this debate, because usually this debate is just how do we get people more skills, the robots are taking our jobs, and that's kind of it. And now that's the first time I've heard occupational licensing as a future of work issue, but presumably it is, and I want to add two additional lenses to make this even more complex. So the highest percentage of job creation happens in fast growth small businesses, actually, research shows. So how do we get those fast growth small businesses support, and how do we get them to hire more is actually a key question that should be part of this debate that never is. It's actually a very different discussion that often happens. And so injecting that into this debate, I think, is incredibly important. And the ILO surveys small businesses around the world, and when they ask, what's your number one barrier? Why aren't you hiring more? Why aren't you paying your employees more? The answer is always access to finance. We don't have support. We don't have investment. We're very small. How do we get access to finance? So again, an issue that is almost never discussed as part of the future of work debate is actually a central element to why this problem exists. Secondly, you mentioned your father spending 5 months to study up and kind of reskill. And reskilling is obviously one of the central elements of this debate, but another element in the financial services aspect is presumably your father had savings or some kind of support, some kind of credit system or family support, and in the wake of the financial crisis, that's gone for most people. It was in their homes, which were refinanced or sold, or it was in their families who are now, equally damaged by what happened. So again, an issue that probably would never get discussed in the future of work debate is savings and access to credit. Our CEO at PayPal often says, we don't have a cash flow problem. I'm sorry, we don't have a credit problem, we have a cash flow problem. The problem is now with people having intermittent jobs that they might have money today, but they might not have money tomorrow when they need it. And so how can we design products and services that meet the needs of the current dynamic, which is not 1950? I think we often think of how do we get back to 1950? And that's just not going to happen in the future. So how do we think about these multitude of elements that you've really done an amazing job of laying out, and think about where we're going and how we change these elements to reflect the future that we want?
Thanks. We have a second Byron.
Well, if you are towards the end, things are usually covered. I wear two hats. I'm the CEO of PeopleCert, which is a global testing organization and certification of persons organization, certifying people in a variety of subjects and in IT as well. And my second hat, I'm the president of European IT professionals, representing 500,000 IT professionals, and I'm also partly responsible indirectly for the issues that we are discussing here. The issues that have been discussed are not only here for the United States, are exactly the same. I have visibility around the world what's happening. More or less is the same thing all around the world. In Europe, in US, even in India. People think that in India there is a plenty and plethora of people and there is no issue with IT. They have shortage over there. So there is here both the opportunity as well as risk. The opportunity is that the world is changing towards IT. There is nothing we can do around this. And is moving, as Oliver said, very, very fast. The issues that we are discussing, the positions that are going to be lost, are not for the next 30 years, not in the next 40 years. Are going to happen the next 10 years. Things are going to change very quickly, are changing already. We are living this already. And there is nothing we can do about this. In the meantime, there are opportunities, a lot of positions that IT creates. Today, the ICT workforce is about the people that work in the ICT sector in Europe, and I think more or less the same in the US, is approximately 5%. This is going to go more than 50% in the coming years. More than 10 times people that are going to work on the IT sector. And Jeremy said, only in the cybersecurity there are 3 million open positions.
In the US.
In the US. A year ago it was 2 million, I remember. Global is probably 5 million, another million or more is in Europe. European Union has made a study and continues to make the study every year. Currently there are 500,000 jobs open in IT sectors, and it's breakdown. 50% of them are programmers. So from one side, you have existing positions, very well-paid positions that are not filled. And from the other side, there are millions of jobs that are going to be lost. Who knows how many? The futurologists say that in the next 20 years, we're going to see changes that we have seen in the last 300 years. And this is pure a numbers game. We can't do much on changing the economy. Whatever jobs are going to be lost are going to be lost. The only thing we can do is try to think what type of jobs are going not to be lost. Low-skilled jobs are going to be automated. Efficiency is going to be lost. I mean, we used to pay in the last 20 or 30 or 40 years efficient people more versus the ones that are less efficient. This is not going to be something important in the coming years. There is always going to be a robot who will do the job more efficiently. Jobs that are related with emotional skills, emotional intelligence, are going to be more difficult to replace. So we have to guide our society, our children, to choose this type of positions. And from the other side, how do we skill people? 50% of the gap today is programmers. And becoming a programmer is not needed to go for a school for 4 years. There are many coding bootcamps in the US, I'm surprised nobody mentioned this, bringing thousands of people in 14 weeks, in 16 weeks. You can reskill people, and that's the name of the game, reskilling. Because if we're going to talk that the change is going to happen in 10 to 15 years, you can't do much in schools. Because yes, young people will be there, but there are millions of people that are today 30 years, 35 years, and they have another 30 years in front of them. What are you going to do with those people? Reskilling, quick reskilling. And this is not something that can be done only from the governments. It has to involve also the employers themselves, as well as NGOs, so that everybody is involved. Last point, you know that I'm from Greece, and Greece is a country that has the world record in unemployment on the Western world, 25%. Now it's 23%. Which is also an opportunity because we started a huge reskilling program in the next 10 years, creating 500,000 IT jobs. And through coding bootcamps, we already have people that are employed in companies at some age. They completed the coding bootcamp in 14 weeks, nothing to do with STEM, theologists that right now are programmers, and they found a job, and they are very happy, both themselves and the companies that are working them. So yes, it's social impact. Yes, it's political impact. Yes, it's cultural impact. But the first one we need to move immediately is the economic impact, and the name of the game is reskilling. Thank you.
Theologist programmer scares me a little bit, but God knows what they're putting in the code. Jeremy, tell us more about these jobs that need to be filled, how we're going to fill them. You seem to have a more pessimistic approach to this. Interested in your thoughts.
I'm actually a hopeless optimist. I'm an entrepreneur, and I work, our family business is I'd like to think a job-creating vehicle. The fact that this is about disruption, our business is in the area of risk management. So we have a number of businesses that we create out of our investment vehicle, specifically to start businesses that are in search of public policy issues. So for instance, we started a credit rating agency after the financial crisis because we felt that the world needed more trusted sources of information when analyzing credit. We started a business in cybersecurity where we spend lots of our time trolling around the dark net and looking for cybercrime and where it's coming from and where it's going. We also have focused our business interests on fighting fraud and corruption. And our offices actually are in the EU and the Middle East and Africa. Here in the States, our headquarters is in Midtown. So we embrace disruption. We look for big, important policy issues that can take out the electrical grid, that can take out or reduce the trust in certain industries. And we look at what causes, for example, radical behavior. So K through 12, I think, is absolutely a vital area to begin with, not just for trading old regimes of education for new skill development, but it's a path to giving children hope, because those kids at some point could make a major difference. And what we want to focus is on the positive side of the balance sheet as opposed to the extreme and negative and violent side of the balance sheet. The speed of education is rapid. When we look at our employee bases, we actually have, and this is one of our challenges, but a dramatically big chasm between internet natives and people who were born before the internet. And I don't mean, 10 years before, I mean 20, 30, 40 years. So part of how we manage disruption in our business is through diversity, and not just diversity of economic backgrounds, but education. We look at people who come from different eras, because we think combining wisdom and life experience with people who have lived with no other choice but to live digitally is absolutely vital. And one of our challenges internally as an employer is driving more consistent and effective communications and collaboration. We also hire people not based on what zip code they're in, but what their skills are and who they know. So as a young analyst in a private investigative field in 1996, I was sitting at my desk about to open a new case, and I don't know if anyone remembers Alta Vista. Yeah, so Alta Vista was this cool search engine we could use. So I'd spent the prior 2 years running around the courthouses thumbing through records, court records, and trying to find, doing a background check. So sitting at my desk now, I had stumbled on this thing called Google. And when I saw how powerful Google was compared to Alta Vista, I said, wow, Alta Vista is toast. I mean, they're done. But wait a second, what is Google going to do to our business? We're in the business of providing information, just like journalists, academics, researchers, but synthesized into something that you can make a decision with. So I said, well, we can either be really freaked out by Google or we can embrace the fact. So yeah, there are a lot of jobs that are taken away by automation, and I think our company name is K2 Intelligence. I'd like to think we could just drop artificial right in the middle, but that is not going to do it. I think this combination of wisdom and experience and just vibrancy and energy where people have grown up in the internet, it's so critical that they're in the same room together, not just the same chat room. And the last point that I would make when it comes to sustainability as a for-profit business is going back to education. We're doing three tangible projects, one in Ghana, one on Roosevelt Island, and one throughout all the public school 24 public school locations. So in Ghana, we're equipping young men and women with computer equipment, with technical training, and we're introducing them to potential employers. So not only are we handing them the tools, we want to, the skill sets it's the EQ as well, communication skills and social engagement, so that they can become a desirable employee. In Roosevelt Island, you have the Cornell Technion campus, which is not just taking science and doing dramatic things with it, but actually applying it to commercial needs. So one of the brilliant things that was done by Mayor Bloomberg is create that competition. We now have an applied sciences campus in Manhattan. Roosevelt Island, I guess it's between Manhattan and Queens. And this is a job-creating beast, just waiting to be unlocked. And the focus should not be on Wall Street. It should be uptown, where I chair a nonprofit called City Year, and many of our schools are in the South Bronx. And we are training our mentors to train kids 3rd through 10th grade to not only graduate high school, but to be positioned and to create employable people. And we've got to connect that to employers. And someone said something about describing demand. What is it that you demand? The private sector has to do a better job of explaining what they want. This conversation is way, way too out of reach for the people we really want to make the difference, both in terms of boosting the economy and also stopping them from perpetrating cybercrime or blowing up buildings. So I don't know if that was what you expected from me, but
no, it was much better than what I expected from you. So, well done. Okay, I was going to ask Gus if he wanted to weigh in before. I know he's got a daughter to pick up. A lot of us, but Gus, I don't want you to leave without having to say.
Hi, everybody. So, I told my daughter I would call her on her 9th birthday at 6. At 6, I'm going to go call her. The one thing that is most important and the biggest risk is to not. Or is to have our schools perpetuate what's going on in the United States and abroad. So if we try and change the types of textbooks, or try and change the lessons, or try and teach people about new technologies, it'll all end up being disrupted. It'll all end up being disrupted even if we predict very accurately what will happen in 10 years. So the schools have to change their mission to create flexible and adaptive learners and to future-proof themselves. The people who are the most marginalized, the populations that we've talked about a couple of times today are the ones who are most at risk for getting, having the 1950s model of education perpetuated. And I think what we need to do is create problem solvers, and there are methods to do that. The other thing is to have evidence-backed curricula and evidence-backed instructional methods that could be informed by AI, that could be informed by machine learning, but instead of having someone think, wouldn't it be great to implement the Montessori method, et cetera, actually prove that it works at scale in the communities where you want to implement it. There are vast cultural differences between places like Oman and Cincinnati, and we have to respect those, and we have to acknowledge those as we try and train a new group. All this reskilling and all this talk about creating adult learner populations is exactly right on, but it's a different kind of thing. When you talk about adult learning in these 14 or 16-week coding camps, you're talking about learning things like COBOL. I'm a recovering IBMer. It's okay. You think about how to learn C++ or C Sharp, et cetera. What our primary and secondary schools should be doing all over the world is creating problem solvers who can collaborate across cultures and who can navigate thorny issues like automation and evil robots that are come and sent to destroy us by other robots that were created using artificial intelligence. So anyway, the biggest risk is that we keep our schools the same and we don't change them to adapt to an era of disruption. Can I rest my case there?
Rest it.
All right.
Happy birthday to your daughter.
Thanks. All right, thank you.
We're over time, but I'm cognizant of making sure everybody has a voice. So I want to go to Evangelist, who hasn't had a chance to speak, and Kelly as well. And I think everybody else has at least weighed in one time.
I think I'm officially the last one now, which...
well, Kelly.
No, there's still me. Oh, there's still you.
We saved the best for last over here.
So I'll try to keep it short. By background, I'm a consultant by training. I've been doing it for about a decade now, at McKinsey before, at Hackett now. More interestingly, I used to be an AI researcher way before it became cool. Back in the days where it was in life support, almost pronounced dead. And now apparently it's the new thing out there. So I clearly mistimed that. What excites me, and maybe Laura, it's a different take, and I'd love your thoughts as well. Is there an opportunity to actually use this disruption, use this technological innovation to actually have better jobs, better quality jobs, jobs that are maybe very different? So it's a scary thought today that people are not used to being a bit more flexible. Maybe the level of entropy raises a little bit. Maybe people are not as stable and they do multiple things at the same time and they don't have this 20-year career, but that's actually a great thing. If I have to do the same thing for 20 years, going at work at 9, leaving at 5, in my cubicle, whatever it is, with all the respect to people that did it, I wouldn't enjoy that very much. So is there an opportunity, and that is more of a question than a statement, is there an opportunity for this disruption to actually result into better jobs, happier people that can spend more time with their families or doing all sorts of other things? And maybe the blend of work and family, if managed well, can actually be a positive thing rather than a negative thing. So that's my one point. My second point, and I'll leave it at that, what scares me, and a lot of people talked about it in different ways. What scares me is timing. So the long term, I'm pretty optimistic about. So 20 years from now, I think we're going to be in good shape. There's enough jobs, Susan said, to sustain a lot of people. Actually, if I read a BCG survey from a few years ago, there's actually a jobs shortage. So there's stuff for people to do, and a lot of people mention that. How we get there is what worries me a little bit. So the pace of innovation and the change may be faster than how we all adapt our training programs, our education programs, all the things that we do. Couple that with political issues that have come up over the last, I don't know, 5 years now or however long it's been. So my worry is not 20 years from now. My worry is in the medium term. So 4 or 5 years from now until 10 to 15 years from now, where you end up with a lot of disruption, a lot of fast change. We don't do things, or the things that we do don't let people adapt fast enough. It's hard to take somebody from a manufacturing job to becoming a cybersecurity specialist. Maybe that retraining actually cannot be done fast enough. So that's my biggest thing. How do we manage the next 10 years? And are we up against a social, if you will, I don't want to call it revolution, but a social issue over the next 10 years that we're not able to manage, and it gets ugly before it gets better. So I'll leave it at that.
Certainly argue that it's already ugly, but I'll leave that for others to decide. Kelly, you're up last.
Fantastic. I'm not sure if it's the pleasure or the pressure of watching the timer ticking down here as the last speaker, but I have been watching it on Ben's behalf, feeling his nerves as we kind of run over here. It's probably a bit of an opportunity, actually, to be the last person to speak, and having had the grace to listen to all of the commentary and so on here. I'm the Chief Talent Officer at MasterCard. I think most of you know what we do. We're a technology and payments firm. But let me just kind of, I guess, as I think about a lot of the commentary that's been around the table here, there's lots of angst and energy, and we've got some optimism, but also I sense quite a lot of anxiety, actually. And what a great topic, actually, for us to have as a closing topic for today. But might I just kind of finish with that we actually are the humans. And we actually saw a little bit of emotion and empathy just a few minutes ago with somebody's birthday. And I guess what comes top of mind for me is that as humans, we have an incredible opportunity to cultivate digital intelligence, but to ground it in human values. And that's what's really important for me. And particularly because I still believe that the jobs that artificial intelligence can't replace actually will be those that require really strong human traits, and traits around empathy, positive attitude, resilience, and also curiosity. And these are things that we absolutely own as humans. I think the other thing that I've heard as we've talked today is this tension between shareholder profit and also societal value. And societal values actually come out in a number of the conversations around the room, including the quilt actually, and access to financial empowerment. And we do a lot of work at MasterCard in that space as well, but it's really important. And I think for me as Chief Talent Officer, it's very much about embedding some of those traits that I've talked about in our culture. And I think culture also came up as an area that was important amongst many of the members around the table here. You know, technology for us has got an enormous opportunity to help with. There's a lot of big issues that are happening in the world at the moment, not only Irma and our responsibility if we think about how we sustainably should be protecting the environment, but also around how we can reduce accidents, incredible advancements in health, and also around how we provide food. And that also came up across the table over here, across the world. So one of the things at MasterCard that we've been trying to do is to ingrain within our culture, and certainly within our graduates and also within our leadership levels, the opportunity for them to partner with our Centre for Financial Inclusion and also with our innovation labs. So it's looking at how we can actually use technology as a corporate and as part of our wheelhouse to solve some of these big issues. And for me, and I'm sure for many other CEOs, I think what should be keeping them awake at night as we think about this dilemma actually is how do we as corporates use our technological advancements and the profits that they bring, but actually to provide societal gain. Thank you.
A good place to end it on. Susan, did you have any additional remarks to close us out? Go ahead.
I would like to thank everyone. This was an incredibly fascinating conversation. We brought together many different voices. So really, I think I had no idea where this was going to go, but it was incredibly illuminating and complex. And despite having so many speakers, we really didn't repeat each other a whole lot. And it's fascinating, and I want to thank everyone. I feel like I learned a lot, and I hope all of you did as well.
I certainly learned a lot. Thank you to all of these panelists. I'm sorry we couldn't get more time with each person, but a lot of people, short period of time. Thank you all for hanging in with us, and thank you to Concordia.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our session. Please join us in the Members Lounge for a reception.